Um, well, I think we're ready to start. Vincent, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, just checking.
Yes, hi, Anna.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, maybe we can start. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do this.
Okay. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to our fifth and final session of the second edition of ConNext. And our session today is dedicated to decorative surfaces. We will have very interesting and challenging presentations from our students that will focus not only in the different supports, but mainly in different decorative techniques, their study and conservation. And as always, the session will start with a fantastic keynote speaker. So, my name is Ana Bidarra of the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar in Portugal.
And my name is Vincent Kattersel of the University of Antwerp in Belgium. So today we will be hosting the final session of ConNext 2022. And before we proceed with our introduction, let's go through some basic rules of conduct. Please make sure that your microphone and webcam are turned off, so not to disturb our presenters during their talk. We also encourage the audience to ask questions, and if you have questions, please do so in the chat box only. We will cherry pick some of the questions for the Q&A sessions. And for some unknown technical reasons, some of the slides show zoomed in. If that's the case, please use the zoom function by clicking on the magnifying glass in the upper left corner of the slides. And finally, this is conference 4 and by emerging conservators. So please respect one another for their exceptional effort for making this event happen. Some of our speakers will be presenting for a large audience for the very first time. So please keep that in mind.
Thank you very much, Vincent. So let's start. I'm really proud to introduce our keynote speaker of today, Lucretia Kargère. Lucretia is conservator of medieval sculptures at Metropolitan Museum of Art. She has been the principal conservator for the Met Cloisters since 2002. She came to the Met in 1996 when she was awarded the first of several fellowships for the technical study and treatment of medieval sculpture. Lucretia has published a significant study of French Romanesque sculptures from the museum collection, and is the co-author of the recently published book, The Conservation of Medieval Polychrome Sculpture from Getty Publications. Wonderful book. She holds a BA from Brown University and an MA in Art History and Advanced Certificate in Conservation from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. So, welcome, Lucretia, and please, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So it's an honor for me to be invited to this conference as a keynote speaker. It's actually a daunting task because of the audience, a next generation of conservators. Believe it or not, I am nervous. And I'm hoping to be inspired by you, but I'll try to inspire you as well. So the list of lectures on the menu today, from I think craquelure of Italian Renaissance panel paintings to Korean lacquerware, Portuguese polychrome sculptures, even transfer painting on wooden furniture, and I hope I'm not missing any. They all have a common thread, which is paint, pigment or colorant on a wooden support. So however, beyond the material description of these objects, each represent important artistic expressions of specific cultures. They are the product of individual artists, yes, but also the manifestation of a society's history, culture, and beliefs when made. Today, these objects hold the memories of the people who made and cared for them. So the question I would like to explore today with you is how a conservator's research and understanding of objects enriches the narrative surrounding the objects they treat. In my case, medieval polychrome sculptures. In other words, how your work as a conservator serves not only towards the success of the treatment itself, but also how it may enhance the relevance of these objects to our society and shared contemporary lives. Next, do I advance? Oops, before, yeah. Of course, to answer this question, all depends on your perspective, where you live, in what society. So for many years, I have been a conservator of medieval sculptures, both stone and wood at the Cloisters, and more recently also the Met in New York City. My experience as a conservator for this museum starts with a personal twist. I grew up in France through high school, moving to America for my upper level education. So studying international relations in college with a particular love for languages, even Russian and German, I switched to art history, with conservation simply becoming another window into the study of cultures. I always say that the Cloisters, located in northern Manhattan, is the closest daily reminder of Europe I could find in New York City. As Europeans, you may comment that the museum is a pastiche of medieval art, with ramparts built to imitate those of Carcassonne in France, or a tower inspired by Romanesque churches in the French Pyrenees. But the building is actually an authentic 1930s museum design, built at the same time as the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So one is in 1938 and the other in 1939. The Cloisters is filled with medieval works of art of outstanding quality, displayed in atmospheric settings, but also it is a center for medieval research. The branch is affiliated to the medieval department of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, located at the heart of Manhattan, with an equally rich and varied collection of medieval sculptures, collected with skill and vision by a succession of curators since the early 20th century. So it is hard to believe when visiting the museum in the 21st century, at the heart of a bustling cosmopolitan city, that polychrome sculptures were once amongst the most widespread, familiar, and powerful images available to people, of course, at a different time and place, Europe in the Middle Ages. These carved figures, decorated with paint, metal leaf, and other colorful materials, are overwhelmingly religious in nature, as they played essential roles as cult and devotional images. Collected and displayed today as works of art, these objects are largely marginal to our contemporary interests. At the Met, and especially during these past couple of years, curators are investigating how to make relevant the museum's medieval collection to the modern museum goer. Actually, this conversation is broader. It is about the relevance of museums in our society today. And you see here Yoko Ono's banners of Dream Together, offering a powerful message of hope and unity created in response to the global crisis. So the topic of the relevance of museums to our society today is beyond our immediate scope. So I will stick to speaking about medieval sculptures in our contemporary lives. One approach to discussing medieval art is realizing how interconnected various cultures were in Europe and beyond, the so-called global Middle Ages, a precursor and important historical precedent to our vision of the world today. It was a time of movement of people and ideas, but also a movement of objects and materials. And as a conservator, we have an essential role in identifying the materials used to create these sculptures, enriching the discussion on trade through scientific analysis, whether it is trade of pigments or source of materials for carving. So the examination of French 12th century sculptures at the Met and Cloisters was a crucial project in my career. Discovering the use of Carrière lacquerware on these sculptures, which is red lac, a colorant imported from Southeast Asia, not identified prior to this research before the 13th century on Norwegian and English painted wooden objects. Lac was probably brought to Europe from India and other parts of Asia via North Africa. We also know that the dye stuff was likely imported to France through Catalonia and Catalan traders, with Spanish kings restricting its use in Spain to royal textiles. And here on the right, I'm pointing to a layer of the Kargère lacquerware red glaze. The use of indigo on these sculptures also indicates commerce with Baghdad in Iraq, with documents describing its importation to France through the port of Marseille in the 13th century. And we all know about the exportation of lapis from Badakhshan or modern-day Afghanistan. And again, you see on the upper right the cross-section of the lapis lazuli on top of a indigo mixed with lead white on this 12th century torso of Christ. So while these sculptures may be described as images of cults from remote churches in 12th century France, they take on a different dimension with the technical evidence provided by conservators and scientists, building upon a new perspective of the Middle Ages as a period beyond a Eurocentric creation to that of an interconnected world. In the present day, historians of all periods need to rethink and expand what global has meant in the past and might mean in the future. Commerce and the secular world of the Middle Ages is another line of study relevant to present-day visitors. This was a moment where numerous boom towns flourished, with cities like Bruges, Antwerp, Brussels, Cologne, Nuremberg, Lucca, Genoa, and Burgos, to name a few. Each town had their own markets, where luxury goods, artist materials, and works of art were sold. The conservator's eye to the study of sculptures again is key to refining curatorial discourse on these objects. Hundreds of Brabantine carved altarpieces were exported through Europe during the 15th and 16th century. Through detailed observation, we find the carvers, joiners, and polychromers' marks on Brussels, Antwerp, or Mechlin sculptures, proof of market regulations. Examination of surfaces may also document the imitation in paint of luxury goods available through commerce at the time, namely textiles imported from Lucca to northern countries, such as velvety or satiny blues imitated with azurite, or embellished woven silks represented with tiny copper cupels on a dark red glaze, as you see on the right. Besides the idea of an interconnected world, the Middle Ages was also a time of technical innovation and virtuosity. Despite the phrase we hear all the time of the Dark Ages, with all techniques lost between antiquity and the Renaissance. Again, our role as conservators is crucial in examining these objects, revealing elaborate modes of decorations with an evolution in techniques from the 10th, early 16th century, such as this evolution of textile decoration imitations with raised appliqué tin on the left to brocades, sgraffito or estofado techniques, and stencils, to name a few. So where a curator or art collector may look at a sculpture according to its stylistic qualities or iconographical function, conservators dive deeply into the examination of sculptures, scrutinizing surfaces under a microscope. There's still immense amounts of documentation, examination, and analysis to be performed on these works of art, given their richness of polychromy, made all the more complex by the long history of repainting and restorations found on these objects today. So while material analysis bring concrete answers to certain questions, many remain unanswered, new ones come into play, and substantial shifts occur in how we view polychrome wood sculptures. In this virtuosity, there's also the study of charismatic carvers or workshops, the Riemenschneiders of the Middle Ages. Still, much work needs to be done to develop a better understanding of the technical specificities of these workshops, what makes them so extraordinary, and how the social construct of each workshop was organized. Thankfully, the progress made by science in the examination of wood and its painted layers is evident. For example, the use of interactive computational photographic method known as RTI or reflectance transformation imaging has been tested on Tilman Riemenschneider's Marian Alter in Kreglingen, Germany, to render surface details in much greater details and clarity. Advanced scientific analysis of paint layers and media combined with close scrutiny of original treatises has also allowed for the reproduction of the artist's original techniques, such as this bust by Michael Erhardt, reproduced in Frankfurt by Harald Theis at the Liebighaus, conveying to our modern audiences how the sculpture may have originally looked. In sum, we, as conservators, can make the discourse and narrative of museum display immensely richer. As a field, however, we struggle on how to make our voices heard in this narrative, with conservators sometimes relegated to the physical gestures of consolidating, cleaning, repairing, and painting without further discourse on the value of our intervention. If I may give some advice to the next generation of conservators, it's to find your voice. And in so doing, I would say knowledge is a powerful tool. This is cliché, but the more you know, the more your opinion is respected. Some colleagues in our field embark on completing a PhD, grounding their work in significant scholarship. As it was mentioned, I decided to work on a book-length project with a very close colleague of mine, Michelle Marincola, distinguished professor of conservation at NYU. The conservation of medieval polychrome wood sculptures, history, theory, and practice. The book, published by the Getty, was initially conceived to fill a lacuna in the English language conservation literature with no single volume to which to direct young conservators. We found that conservation literature on medieval polychrome sculptures was generally scattered through important articles, symposiums proceedings, exhibition catalog entries in many languages, including German, French, Italian, and Spanish. But there was no broad overview covering the history of restoration, theory, and current conservation practices for medieval polychrome wood sculptures. The project was a long exercise in communicating to our audience, whether it be students and practicing conservators, but also curators, art historians, collectors, and dealers in as clear a manner as possible, explaining technical terms to make the text accessible and engaging for the broadest possible audience. This was a 10-year effort and a team effort. Collaboration both lightened the work and enriched and complicated the experience, since we continuously negotiated content, read each other's chapters, and double-checked references. During the period of research, I learned about the history of collecting medieval art in America, as the book highlights the rich collections of American museums. And here's a list of the institutions we visited, examining literally each and every sculpture displayed and preserved in galleries and storage. The examination entailed careful looking at current surfaces, but also archival research of museum files to define present condition and past history of treatment. So an immense amount of information. Since a large body of medieval sculptures remain in Europe, either still displayed in situ in churches or preserved in museum collections, we also interviewed the people in the care of these objects in regional conservation centers who have developed immense expertise. And it is the voice of these specialists that we try to weave into this publication, either through our conversations with them or through their own publications, regardless of language. So Michelle and I visited many institutions and churches along the way. And I'm happy to present here a selection of our amazing colleagues in Europe. And these colleagues and their voices comprise a huge body of knowledge. Having completed this project, I was promoted conservator of medieval sculptures not only at the Cloisters, but also at the Met. So this was not ambition. It was a true, genuine, and true quest for knowledge, again, which led to broader access to the museum collection and greater cooperation with colleagues and curators in the museum. So in this position, I continue to try to bring new data to the museum narrative, such as participation in the provenance study of medieval alabasters in cooperation with the Louvre and the Geological Center BRGM, through isotope analysis of 8 of our alabasters, a project completely changing our understanding of alabaster trade, both raw material and finished sculptures in medieval Europe. And here you have a view of all the 8 sculptures that we sampled and the various quarries that have been, some have been recently discovered. So the one in Würzburg, Franconia, and also it changes our view of the alabaster being imported always from England and has their new quarries that we used in the Alps and the Jura and also Provence. So as a final note, I will reflect on my role as museum staff of a major cultural institution in America. Today, we're asked to be much more public-facing, to participate in social media, and to reach to the public in a most visual way. Of course, there's the new world of internet conferences, and whether it is a blessing or a curse, having keynote speakers from the other side of the Atlantic pop into your worlds, and vice versa. The struggle we're facing is to be able to find the proper balance between respect for scholarship and propagation of our passion for works of art to a broad, diverse audience. I think this is a key moment in cultural institution as the public is ready to hear about material science and conservation. There's a shift to find a more inclusive role of conservation and science in museum exhibits and displays, and concurrently a more inclusive definition of scholarship in the structuring of museum exhibition catalogs. As discussed in this presentation, the materiality of works of art may bring much information to the general discourse of museum collections. So as you look forward to your career as conservators, one of the most difficult things you will have to do is to advocate for the work you do by finding ways of communicating the specialized knowledge you have that mixes art, technology, science, and history, not only with colleagues, but also with the public at large. You will have to learn when to be clear and firm in your immediate requests for objects, but also, and most importantly, how to develop the art of compromise, as our work as conservators is only one aspect of a complex enterprise of cultural preservation. Finally, as we navigate the preservation of different cultures, remember that you're part of an international network of conservation and scientists. It is important to respect each other's perspectives and knowledge, to form the trust and personal relations that make life interesting, while build on the knowledge we have of the fascinating and beautiful objects under our care. So the podium is yours, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lucretia, for this inspiring talk and also for sharing the medieval marvels with us. So as always, if you have any questions for Lucretia, please put them in the chat and we will take them during the Q&A session. So first up is a postponed poster pitch by master student Rafael Sousa, co-authored by Professor Fernando Antunes and Dr. Aurelio Ribeiro, all from my fellow host home institute, the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. During his internship at the ITP, Rafael used 3D software to reconstruct the 17th century vestry cabinet. But throughout the process, he realized that 3D reconstruction proved to be of an added value for visualizing the object's pathology and damages, and thus for the conservation process as a whole. Rafael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you for the introduction. I was trying to roll the camera, but it isn't working. I don't know why. So I'll proceed like this. So this poster was made about a work I made on the internship I developed in the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. The work was about the intervention on a 17th century vestry cabinet from the mother church of Golgã, a village in the center region of Portugal, It was identified with the provenience probably from Netherlands. The style was identified as the cast style, and the owner is the Gulligan parish. Here I'm turning on the. Okay, so here you can see the cabinet when it arrived at the IPT before it was started to turning into pieces because it was in a very poor condition. The first thing we've done, we checked for previous written descriptions and photographic documentation about the cabinet. It wasn't too much. What led us to do the work we developed and what this poster is about, the 3D modeling. So we checked for the documentation. We tried to figure out the element fittings and the position of some of the parts, because when my internship started, the cabinet was already torn apart. All the pieces were identified. But for me, as the first time I was looking at all those pieces, I needed to look to them and figure out how they fitted. So all the work we developed started from this. The next step was the exploded perspective photography. We used the remaining elements after being cleaned, and we disposed them into the exploded perspective. We took the pictures from each level, from the base, from the drawers level, and from the top. Here we have two pictures with those are the lions, the fits from the cabinet. Then this is the level where the drawer slided in. Okay, not the drawer. Those are the drawers. So and this is the top. Using the exploded perspective, it was really useful to figure out where each piece belonged to. So we used these pictures, and we used the exploded perspective to figure out from where we could start creating the 3D model. So each helmet has been measured and exploded from the exploded perspective pictures and used as a support for the fitting schemes. The creation of the 3D model was done using the software Google SketchUp, because that was the only software I knew and I knew how to use. So this is the final result of the 3D model. Here we can see the different views of the cabinet. The only thing that really wasn't done, how can I say it, similar or exactly equal to the reality were the lions, because as far as I know, the SketchUp is a software that is more simple, and maybe it can be used for more organic forms, but I didn't know how to do it. So I created like a line that contornated the lions, and I did the lions like this. This 3D model was very useful, for example, for doing the damages and pathologies mapping, as we can see in this picture. This is the case of of the I don't know exactly. This is the case, I guess, of the lacks of polychromy. Yes. So, as conclusions, B and three-dimensional reconstitution on heritage pieces can be useful for study in an easier way the construction and fitting systems, for develop pathologies and damages mappings as I've done, and for help the future work up to the moment that the intervention is done, because as my internship only took 9 months, at the end the only thing that was concluded was the base, this level of the cabinet. And it can be also useful to create a virtual archive and allow anyone to access it anywhere. This is the work that really was done at the end of my internship. As you can see, the lions and this base level. So I hadn't the time that was really necessary because this cabinet was in a really poor condition. Yes, it really was. It really was. So this is what I was able to do during the 9 months, and the 3D model that really took a long time to do. So, first, I am sorry for my English. It isn't the best, but I think it was enough to show you what this work was about. Thank you very much.
So, oh, sorry, I lost my thank you very much, Rafael. I think everyone understood it quite well. It was a very good approach on how 3D models can help to understand an object and help the conservation treatment. I think you made that clear. And I know there is not always enough time to finish the work that we intend to do.
Yes,
in our internships. So thank you very much. We will have some questions for Rafael, I believe. Please put them in the chat. So let's proceed to our third presentation of this evening by master student. And now my problem is not so much with the English, but I'm sorry, Mena, for what I'm going to say. Master student Mena Freystatzky. From the Hawke Institute. Mena will talk about the research she conducted for a bachelor thesis. For this work, she studied X-ray images from the Thomas Brachert archive of paintings by the renowned 15th century artist Andrea del Verrocchio and Leonardo da Vinci. Her work will show interesting correlations between technique of painting and current craquelure morphology. So, please, Mena, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, so the title is Survey on the Correlation of Painting Technique and Craquelure, shown on selected X-ray images of the Thomas Brachert archive. This is also the title of my bachelor thesis. And the painting technique here is the used materials and the application of the materials for the painting. I had 5 panel paintings from Leonardo da Vinci and his master, Andrea del Verrocchio. And I only could see prints of analog X-ray images from the collection of Dr. Thomas Brachert, because this was at the very beginning of the pandemic in 2020. So this is the structure. I'm going to briefly talk about the painting techniques in the paintings I examined and the craquelure patterns I found. And then I talk about the correlations I found on the paintings between these two, and also my thoughts on the causality between these two. So Verrocchio and Leonardo worked as artists in many fields, including as painters, but they also did sculptures and wall paintings. How you all know, these are artists of the Italian Renaissance, and this was the time where the transition from tempera to oil as a binding agent was apparent. The common ground of these 5 examined paintings are the poplar panel and the gesso ground, so a gesso grosso and a gesso sottile of all paintings. These are the 5 paintings. I'll shortly show you the paintings and the X-ray images I had. This is the Mary with Child from Verrocchio from around 1470, and there I have all the X-ray images from the whole painting I could examine. From the Baptism of Christ, I only had a small part of the X-ray images. This was a painting that was painted by Verrocchio and Leonardo together. Then I had also the Madonna with Carnation. This is also not the whole painting, so all the edges are missing, and I only have a big part of the middle ground of the painting as an X-ray image. This is the most part of the X-ray images I had. This painting is more than 2 meters wide. The Annunciation of Leonardo, from Leonardo, and there was only one X-ray image missing right in the middle, and I don't know where this is gone. And at last, the Ginevra de' Benci from Leonardo, where I also have nearly the whole X-ray image. So then on the classification and origin of craquelure, you can classify craquelure based on the appearance or the cause, or based on a catalog by Bucklow from 1997, based on set characteristics, where you can answer questions to exactly describe the craquelure pattern. And the appearance can allow a conclusion about the time period of creation of the paintings, but this is a very, very vague conclusion. The origin of craquelure is that emotion in the painting leads to tension, and this leads to distortion. Emotion can origin either by small movements within the painting or by external mechanical influence, like when you hit a painting. Yes, and so microscopic weak spots in the paint, like inclusions of air or molecular inhomogeneities, are widened to micro cracks, which lead to cracks, and they can spread around the painting. Here are 2 of the images that I compared. I took from the paintings, from the X-ray images I had, I took 20 sections of 4 by 5 centimeters in the flesh, in the sky, and ropes of different colors, which I compared to one another. There were no clear correlations I could find from the beginning between the craquelure pattern and the painting technique, but so I looked at all the different aspects one by one. First, binding agents. It seems that an oily binder correlates more with disordered cracks, like here in the Annunciation, but the difference is not very clear. The Mariana with child on the left is by the Mary with child is by Verrocchio and is painted with tempera, and there the cracks are a little bit more ordered. Then I looked at the color and the pigments, and there I found out that in green and brown areas the cracks are often more ordered and with rectangular paint aisles, like on the left side, also in the Annunciation, in the green robe. But in the blue parts, the craquelure pattern is mostly disordered. This could be caused by the pigment structure or also by the relation of pigment and binder. Then I looked at the application technique. I couldn't find an influence of applications with a brush on the craquelure pattern, but Verrocchio and mostly Leonardo often painted with their fingers because the oily binder was very thick. So they spread the paint with the fingers, and here in the Annunciation and in the Baptism of Christ, you can see that the order of the craquelure patterns resembles the lines of the fingers. Yes, the lines of the fingers in the paint. Then I had some conspicuous craquelure patterns I looked at securely. Here in the Ginevra de Banshee, in the sky, are very thick cracks. Those are caused by paint shrinkage while the paint dried. And so these unordered big cracks caused a secondly craquelure pattern that is also very unordered. Also, I had here in the Annunciation, this is an architectural feature in the background, and this, I'll take the pointer. This here is one painted stone, but you can clearly see that here is a line and the craquelure pattern above is very different from that below. This is much finer and a little more disordered. And this line you can see here is the line between two wooden panels. So it shows that the structure of the wood has a very huge influence on the craquelure pattern. I could not detect in which way particular. It may be caused by the direction of the cut or the way the wood grew. Yes. And the last conspicuous craquelure pattern I noticed was between those two, the Baptism of Christ and the Madonna with Carnation, which are both areas in the flesh, but the craquelure patterns are very different. Maybe this is an influence of the binding medium, because the Baptism of Christ was painted by Verrocchio and Leonardo, And it is also known that it is partly painted in tempera and partly in oil. So maybe this is an area where there is tempera in the binding medium, and so the craquelure is more ordered. So in the summary, I found correlations in the panel paintings I examined. Mostly the finger painting technique had an influence on the direction of the cracks, and maybe the used pigments also had an influence. And it is clear that the wooden panel beneath has the predominant effect. Like in the picture I showed you, there was the same painting technique, but the craquelure pattern was different, and this is only because of the wooden panel beneath that is different. To verify or refute my results, further examination is needed. I had a very small data volume with only 5 paintings. Large data volume is needed to verify these results, and maybe paintings with a stronger tradition in painting technique. Like I said in the beginning, maybe, I hope, Leonardo da Vinci also experimented with different binding materials. So this is not the binding agents between his paintings also varied. So this is not good to compare the different paintings. And at last, what would help is the identification of materials, so that you can say which pigments lead to which craquelure pattern, or which binding material is used in which area, in which painting. These are the sources I used for this presentation. And then I thank you for listening and hope you have many good questions I can answer.
Thank you, Mena. What an amazing way to make value of these historical archival records. And I think it also might be interesting to have a look at the Alan Burrows collection of X-ray radiographs, which is fully open access through the Harvard Art Museums. I will post a link in the chat in a minute or so. So next we have Alma Ben Yossef, who will present her master thesis that focuses on the art technological context of a Korean mother of pearl lacquerware box from a collection from a museum that stole my heart, the Museum für Lackkunst in Münster, Germany. Her research laid out the material technical lacuna within our collective knowledge about the making process of Najeon Chilgi lacquerwares, or lacquerwares decorated with natural materials such as mother of pearl and turtle shell. Through a multi-analytical approach, Alma aimed to gain insights into the production of these precious lacquerwares and its tradition. So Alma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. Do you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Yes. So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And thank you for the previous speakers for the great talks. And thank you to ConNext for the opportunity to share my work and for helping us with the preparations. Today, I will present to you highlights from my upcoming master thesis, Korean Mother of Pearl Lacquerware, Najeon Chilgi, an art technological investigation of a Joseon dynasty clothing box from the collection of the Museum for Lackkunst in Münster. As the title implies, that my thesis concerns a specific case study, a fascinating exemplar of Korean cultural heritage displayed here in Germany. So, Before getting into the details of my project, I want to make a short introduction of the overarching theme, East Asian lacquer. So basics first. What do I mean when I say lacquer? Here I listed some of my first associations. You are invited to continue this list in your minds, but in the East Asian context, we are talking about a specific material, which is the sap of the native Toxidendrum venicifluum of the Anacardiaceae family, or in short, anacard lacquer. You probably know it as urushi in Japanese. In Chinese, it is called chi, and in Korean, ochil. Its use as a binder and coating material dates back to the Neolithic period. It has a unique chemistry of a curing biopolymer, rendering high gloss, durable, and insoluble films. And these are prone to light degradation upon aging. So the inlay tradition originated in China and from there spread to Korea and Japan. But what is special about Korea is their strong connection to their mother of pearl inlay tradition. Korean Najeon Chilgi has been kept alive by artisans who have passed down traditional skills from generation to generation, and important artists can achieve the title of intangible cultural heritage of their craft. Mother of pearl inlay involves the cutting of abalone shells veneers into shapes and their embandment in multiple layers of ochil putties and ochil coatings that are later exposed and polished to a level surface. The manufacturing process is elaborate and may take months, if not years, to complete, and because each layer has to thoroughly cure in a humidity chamber, so in high humidity. As we can see on this timeline excerpt, the technique flourished in Korea already a millennium ago during the Goryeo period, and the following Joseon dynasty lasted about 500 years. And only towards its decline in the late 19th century did Najeon Chilgi become available to a wider crowd and a growing middle class. But what do I mean when I say that this timeline is fragmented? I refer to unfortunate historical circumstances of political turmoil in the region. By that I mean war and occupation, during which much historical information has been lost. So in this map, you can see a survey of objects which were dispersed from the country. Most of them are held in Japan and the US, followed by Germany. And why did I do that? I am citing here Hwang Ji-hoon, a curator at the National Museum of Korea, who stresses that the lack of historical records to testify for the chronological development of Najeon Chilgi. And the text calls for intensifying scientific studies to help in dating and attribution of objects. So add to it that Korea is relatively underrepresented in the conservation literature. These are the things that motivated me to concentrate on Korean lacquer. So my project was born out of a larger project, which was the collaboration between the Museum for Lackkunst, the Overseas Cultural Heritage Foundation, and the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences of the TH Köln. In this framework, the foundation generously funded the visit of the lacquer conservator, Mr. Yang Seok-jung, who was invited by the museum to conduct the treatment on the box at the CICS workshops, here in the picture. In this way, the department also benefited from having a resident expert for the students to look over his shoulder. And I was lucky, really lucky, to be such a student. And after expressing my interest in Korean lacquer to the museum, it was decided to add my project on top and conduct a parallel investigation while utilizing the facilities of the CICS. And the museum's special exhibition catalog set me up for my journey. So with the generous support of the Museum for Lackkunst, I began my investigation of their clothing box. The box is executed in softwood and plainly finished on its interior with a red coating. Its exterior is lavishly decorated with black lacquer, inlaid with large mother-of-pearl pieces cut into flora and fauna motifs. A pair of cranes and a pair of phoenixes, surrounded by branches of peach fruit and stylized cloud. The motifs on the lid encircle a central medallion of the Chinese character Shu, which means longevity or long life. And the sides of the box are decorated with friezes of flower scrolls with large blossoming peony tendrils in the middle. And this object is a good case study because it has contradicting features that could be interpreted as either earlier or later than its current dating, 17th or 18th century. Some stylistic elements, such as the extension of the tendril here over the corner, may point to an earlier dating, whereas the iconography, especially the longevity symbol, could relate to later styles. And so, although undocumented, the box surfaces have been repaired in the past. And in addition, a yellow transparent coating covered the entire box. This is before the treatment. The condition of the exterior surfaces showed pervasive cracking, lifting lacquer, and loose mother of pearl inlay. As I've mentioned, Mr. Young's primary goal was to address the poor condition of the lacquer and to restore the mother of pearl iridescent colors and shine. From working alongside Mr. Young and his assistant, Miss Lee, I could learn about the values for preservation from their point of view and about the materials they use in their treatment. But Mr. Young also found time in this 1 month to guide my examination of the object. By consulting with him, I could gain insight into the historical and technological aspects of the original fabrication, to distinguish later restorations from the original, and to identify together signs of degradation. I would like to mention at this point that some of the analyses were conducted by the conservation scientist Dr. Esther Ferreira prior to treatment, where she identified the yellow coating, for example, as shellac. In my investigation, I combined straightforward close observation with the various analytical tools that the KICS has to offer. The images here are meant to illustrate this forensic approach. Here, the lid, visual light in UV, and X-ray radiography conducted by my supervisor, Mr. Andreas Krupa. During examination, I aimed to understand how the object was fabricated, its wooden construction, decorative layers, and metal fittings, and, if needed, analyze material composition. In addition, I tried to contextualize my findings in the existing research by allocating comparable objects and comparing reported technical findings. Since we're short on time, I'd like to focus today on two interesting discoveries. The first is a red layer found here under the Najeon Chilgi decoration, and the second is a sheet of intermediary paper between the red layer and the decorative layer. So remember that the interior is also red. Apparently we had a red finished box before it was decorated. Here we see a cross-section observed under visual light, blue, and UV radiation. Under the red, there are at least two preparation layers. Sorry, where was I? One is a coarse foundation and two is a compact sealer, appearing here in black. And this preparation indicates that the red layer, here number 3, was an intended finish. The binder in the thick foundation stained positive for protein, using C4 ruby fluorescent dye, and the filler was identified as clay, using semi-DS. That also identified the red pigment as iron oxide. We still want to identify the binder in the red layer, and for this we will use a PyTCMS procedure that was developed at the Getty especially to facilitate the identification of anacrid lacquers. The credit for instrumental analysis goes to the KICS conservation scientists Dr. Anne Sicken and Dr. Esther Ferreira. So we might think that a red box is something special, is not something special, as we know that many East Asian lacquerwares are either red or black. But apparently, in historical Korea, red lacquer was restricted to the use of the royal court only. This changed first at the turn of the 20th century with the decline of the Joseon dynasty. On an inkstone cabinet dated 19th to 20th century, the conservator Jane Williams found a red ground applied under the decoration directly on the wooden substrate. She hypothesized that this was intended to shine through the mother of pearl and give it a warmer tone. But in our case, the red finish can't shine through because a layer of paper separates the red surfaces from the inlay surfaces. And we could not explain the function of this paper in this location. We know that paper could be used like textile as reinforcing layer in the preparation stage. But using it to transfer the design and leave it there is not a common practice according to Mr. Young. As you can see in this video demonstration produced by the V&A, the master Lee Kwang-woong is seen transferring the intricate design which is first laid on paper, then glued upside down and subsequently peeled off. Could it be that the craftsman who lacquered the box did not know the correct procedure? Even if this had a reason, it is not canonical to the technique. And moreover, it is counterproductive to the long-term stability of the object. You can imagine that the hygroscopic paper can add tension to the layer structure. An intermediary paper is also described by Mariana Webb as causing the problem of lifting decoration. This detailed photo, interestingly, Ms. Webb reports this unusual stratigraphy on several Korean objects in her seminal publication on lacquer. And this detailed photo led me to this interesting 19th century box at the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada. Not only does it feature a paper interlayer, it is identical in construction and color scheme to the Munster box. So we are looking into that comparison, and so far we found out that just like the Munster box, it was previously dated to the 17th, 18th century and was recently revised by a visiting expert. So I will shortly list additional material evidence I found in my investigation without getting into detail. So I found machine marks, probably a bandsaw. The binder in the black layers was identified as protein rather than ochil based. And also the application of this foundation layer is more reminiscent of export style that was reported for China and Japan. In fact, we could only identify one layer of lacquer that we assume to be ochil and is still under investigation. As for pigments, research suggests that charcoal foundations are more common in the late Joseon, replacing the earlier bone black. Lastly, the metal fittings are suspected to be a later addition. So, the extravagant Najeon Chilgi design and its masterful execution of inlay work stand in contradiction to its surrounding lacquering, which is simplified in formulation. The second discrepancy concerns the red box. Do both the red finish and the decoration originate from the same time, or is the red box much earlier? These questions are just examples of what could complicate our ability to date the object. In conclusion to this short presentation, I must add some important reservations. My research is based on English literature only, and the comparable objects and findings I show are in no way representative sample to draw broader conclusions on Korean lacquer at this point. And that said, only with accumulative reports we could start a serious comparative study. So that said, and thanks to the involvement of Mr. Young, I was able to identify evidence to consider for the dating and in this way to support the research of the museum. My takeaway points for this presentation are: seek local expertise. We have limited access to professional literature in the language of origin. Plus, it's fun. And point 2 is the fragmented Korean art timeline. From my experience, even as a student, we can contribute to efforts of dating and attribution with the tools that we have. And this was very encouraging to learn. And the last point is red lacquer equals red alert. As we learned, red lacquer in the Korean case is a strong indication for attribution. So before we move on to the discussion, I would like to take advantage of this platform to pose a question for the more experienced audience. My question concerns one of my main challenges during writing, and it goes, if you find contradicting evidence to assumptions made in situ by a specialist, how would you approach it sensitively? Do you have tips for us students from your past experience? And I would like to thank all these dear people for giving me the opportunity and for supporting the project. Thank you, the ConNext team, and thank you to all the listeners. This is my references. See you soon.
So, oh, sorry. Sometimes my script just runs away. So, Alma, thank you very much for sharing your research. I think we all could take a look of such an elaborate technique that produces beautiful objects and by a very, very specific process. So I think we'll have some questions for you and how to address the study of these objects, these Korean objects. So before we proceed to our Q&A session, we will have one more presentation by master student Inês Mariana Cavaco and Professor Fernando Antunes from the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. And Inês will talk about the conservation and restoration process of 3 exquisitely carved and polychromed coats of arms from the Convent of Christ in Tomar, Portugal. Please, Inês.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation, Anna. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you also to you for staying here till lunchtime. So this is my master's degree paper, and I'll be talking about highlighting some problems and how we handle it. As you can see, these are 3 wooden sculptures, front and back, that represent the crest from the Order of Christ, the King of Portugal, Dom Manuel I's coat of arms, and armillary sphere. Since we are handling very delicate objects, our goal was to know better the material of the objects, the techniques, and history in order to preserve and conserve them for the future. For example, we did X-rays and microscopical examination in order to know better. Just by looking at the map at the damage, very colorful, and some details that I highlighted, we concluded that the conservation state was poor due to several causes, and it required immediate attention. Based on this, our treatment proposal was created and focused in 2 parts: restoring and preserving to return stability and strength. We first divided our intervention in 2 parts: the surface layer and material. For example, in the surface layer, we did some fixing of the flaking, cleaning of the dirt, and the material, the correction of the structure, and even the removal of corroded nails. Meanwhile, there were some challenges during the structural review. The biggest was the splits in the armillary sphere and the correction of some elements in all 3 objects, as you can see. In both cases, our key approach was using materials and techniques that would not cause damage. In the first case, the armillary sphere, due to the spherical ring's shape, we, in a creative way, use a mini football filled with newspaper coated with plastic film and aluminum foil to provide the necessary support during the alignment. Then all the pieces were attached together with natural glue and held in place with different size clamps, rubber bands, and sandbags because of this particular shape. The second case was particularly very time-consuming due to the materials and procedures used in previous interventions. For instance, in gluing detached elements, they had to be correct due to be crooked and even have a material gap. And in order to safekeep the material, in this case the wood, we had to fill and correct the attachment. For that, we took it apart using a combination of mechanical chemical methods, and after we used to assemble all together correctly, we use wooden glue, bamboo pegs, clamps, rubber bands, and even small pieces of wood. To conclude, the intervention was a success and the pieces are stable, as you can see in the picture. Despite some unforeseen circumstances, such as the splits, the time-consuming procedure, or even the confinement period due to COVID-19 pandemic. And some key findings that I will have to highlight are sometimes innovation and creative procedures are sometimes the best to complicate problems, and the collaboration with the conservation professional was critical to the success to this project. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Inês, and fantastic to see your creativity at play when using a football to glue the armillary sphere.
Thank you so much.
So now we arrived at the first Q&A session. So let's start with some questions for our keynote speaker, Lucretia Kargère. Lucretia, can you unmute your microphone, please? So we received the first question from Irene Meneghetti. She says, thank you so much for your fascinating presentation. Museum positions are few and far between, but do you have any advice on how to access these positions that aren't just based on CV and education?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I feel like I'm coming from sort of the elitist education path, and I realized that, and so without, I mean, you need a CV, you need to as I said, make as many publications or public speaking as possible to develop a reputation. Otherwise, of course, there are workshops that you can just try to work at and develop your reputation that way. But in museums, mostly, I think we have a certain set of standards, unfortunately, to access to those types of collections. I don't know how to answer this otherwise.
Thank you, Lucretia. Yeah. So I have another one for you, coming from our colleague Andreas Krupa. Find your own voice, you said. Do you witness cases where the voices of conservator restorers have been too loud, in your opinion? Are there red lines which should not be crossed?
Yeah, I think conservation often has the bad role. We often say, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that, because we're protecting the objects. And so, we have strict standards, the 50% humidity and light levels and all these restrictions. And you have to obviously defend the objects and advocate for the object, but you also have to know how to, and I mentioned that, how to be how to find a compromise, because you have the voice of for me in a museum, curators or other people that are in care of collections or art that have a perspective, that have a point, and you need to learn how to be flexible. You really do. Otherwise, when it's really critical, you will not be heard. So it's a little bit like crying wolf all the time, and you know, you have to be careful when you put your foot down strongly. If that's a good answer, I'm not sure, but that's my try at it.
Okay, thank you, Lucretia.
Thank you.
So next question is for another speaker, Rafael. So Rafael, can you unmute your microphone?
Yes.
And so the first question comes from Irene Menighetti. Rafael, can you precise how you did the 3D drawing? Did you create individual parts of the object digitally and then put them all together with the software?
Yes. So the 3D model was created piece by piece. So I didn't create the pieces individually in a certain way. What I did, I took the measurements of each piece and I started considering which piece belonged to which fitting, and I started everything in one model. I didn't create different models for different pieces and put them together. I created a simple model and I make it bigger up till the end.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a really time-consuming job, which brings us to the next question from Welmoed Kreb. So how long did you think the modeling took you?
So it wasn't a work that I did from the start to the beginning. I didn't just this work. It was done a few hours a day, but I think that at the end, maybe it took a month and a half, maybe something like that. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. Anna, it's up to you.
Thank you, Vincent. Now I think we have some questions. Thank you, Rafael. Lucretia, thank you. Some questions now for Mena. Mena, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Yes.
Okay. Hello. One question for you, Mena. This one's for me. I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but you mentioned colored ground layers, and I'm not sure if you showed us an image where you have the same color. I think it was a green, I don't recall, on two different paintings, but the ground layers were different. One was white, the other was green. How do you think the ground also interferes with the craquelure pattern? And does it interfere?
Oh, maybe I said that not correctly. So the ground was the nearly the same in all the paintings. So it was all a gypsum ground or a gesso ground in all the paintings, and I didn't have many technical examinations of the paintings, so I relied mostly in what I saw on pictures and from the few examinations that I had, and few informations from the museums and the from the pictures. So the what I told about the color is purely about the color of the paint layer.
Thank you. So I believe all the paintings that you study have the same white ground layer.
Yes, this is what my research told me.
But you have no indication if it's a gesso or calcium carbonate or something.
Oh, yes, it's a gesso ground for all the paintings.
Oh, okay.
So a
Easier to
gesso
compare.
grosso and a gesso sottile.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. It's a challenging work to try to attribute a color to a specific craquelure pattern or the other way around. Thank you very much, Mena. I think we have one question now for Alma. Alma, can you please unmute your microphone?
Yes, hello.
I'm trying to find you in my screen. Sorry. So one question. So this research that you've showed us today was developed during your master thesis. But as you know, the more we study, more questions just appear. Are you planning on continuing this research? And if so, in a particular area of this Korean lacquer, of the Korean lacquer, or again in a general approach?
Thank you for your question. Maybe I didn't make it clear. I am at the moment writing my master thesis, so I still didn't finish. It's
So
working. I showed you I showed you a working process, and yes, I don't think I think in the thesis we can point out. Highlight some of the things that I like those I showed today, but if we want to really double check them and to consult also Korean expert, and before we can publish something or something like that, we need to do some more research. These are like preliminary results. They are interesting, they are indications, but you still need to go deeper a bit.
Yeah. So,
after the thesis. Yeah.
It's the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alma.
Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, we have one question for Inês. The question is, what type of PVA did you use for consolidating the paint?
It was, I think it has been a long time since I did it, but I think it is wood glue. The latest, I will say, yeah, wood glue, which not very dilute. I'm sorry, my English is not very good. Diluted, I think it makes sense, in water.
Yeah.
That's it.
If you can find like the brand and the type, you can always copy paste it in the chat afterwards.
Okay. And he also had some soap, so we could do that. And at the same time, because we only clean, it was the last thing we did. So we were fixating and at the same time doing a small cleaning. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much. Thank you, Lucretia, Rafael, Mena, Alma, and Inês. And thank you all for very interesting questions. So now we are going to take a little break of time. And we'll see each other again at 8:38. Bye.
So, welcome back, everyone. We hope you had a lovely break and are ready for the second part of this ConNext session. And for the second half of our session, we will have one poster and two paper presentations. The first presentation is a poster pitch by master student Xavier Pedrosa from the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. And Xavier will address the complex challenges of cleaning as graffito on a beautiful wood polychrome high relief plate. So, Xavier, please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for the introduction. So today I'll be talking about the challenges of cleaning 18th century estufado high relief with graffito. To better comprehend the purpose of this presentation, it is necessary to understand that cleaning of artworks, as you may be aware, is one of the procedures in our field that needs the most consideration and to really be thought about given its irreversibility and the aesthetic changes it causes in the object, because in a moment we can have a really dirty object and in the next one it could clean it too much and end up removing part of the decorative layers. And as an example, we can look at an intervention carried out on 18th century polychrome high relief wooden sculpture plate, which was probably a fragment of a Baroque altarpiece uh, that we don't know much details about, but we know that it represents an angel with armor Christi. Armor Christi are the instruments of the Christ's Passion, and it is decorated with sgraffito, a technique where parts of paint are scrapped to rebuild gold leaf underneath. This object was in a very poor state of conservation, and especially the support, since the wood had been attacked by Chilophagous insects, which cause volumetric losses and affect its integrity. But the original polychrome layer and the gilding were also very fragile. This explains why one of the main problems encountered during this intervention was the proper cleaning of the angel wings and tunic, where this graffito had been used, as the use of a harsh solvent could result in the loss of those layers. We realized this was truly an issue because in the preliminary cleaning tests, based on the method developed by Richard Wolbers that uses different proportions of mineral spirits, acetone, and isopropyl alcohol, all of the options were proven to be too aggressive, resulting in the removal of the gilding. And as such, it was necessary to find a suitable solvent for this function. The choice fell on a water in oil emulsion found in the Spanish book Guía de Conservación y Restauración de Escultura en Soporte Orgánico, and it is composed of 100 milliliters of white spirit, 10 milliliters of water, 4 milliliters of twin 20 as a surfactant, and this emulsion was ideal in this particular case because it allowed us to clean the accumulated dirt and debris, but also ensure the gilding and polychrome stability. To remove the emulsion, we could use white spirit, but we had to use it very lightly so we wouldn't affect the decorative layer. Thank you all for listening to me, and especially for the ConNext team for giving us this opportunity, and to my professor Ana Bidarra, not only for all the help during the classes, but especially for the preparation for today. Thank you all.
So thank you, Javier, for this excellent presentation. And next we welcome a talk by bachelor students Vitória Vilas Boas and Francisca Lemos from the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. They will present us with an intriguing case where they decided to remove an overpaint in order to reveal the splendor of the original decorative surfaces on a 17th or early 18th century sculpture. So go ahead.
Hello, can everyone listen?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So hello and good afternoon everyone. We are very grateful to be able to be here presenting our work. And as we were introduced, my name is Francisca, and this is Victoria.
Hi.
And today we've come here to talk about a peculiar sculpture that arrived in our lab. As you can see in the title, Analysis and Pattern of a Baroque Polychrome Wooden Sculpture.
Well, to start our presentation, we'll clarify the main point of our work, because if you are here to describe all the details of this sculpture, we will be here for 3 hours, and without that anyone wants that. That being said, we decided to bring to the table the most interesting topic of our piece, the polychroming, meaning the overpaint and the original paint layer, the estufado, which is a beautiful technique typical of the Iberian Peninsula. And for being such a local technique, we thought it would be the best topic to bring to an international discussion.
So, firstly, we'll be addressing the basic characteristics of the sculpture, followed by the overpaints, then the discovery of the original layer, and finally, the conclusion of our work.
Starting with the sculpture. We know that it's from the Baroque era, and we know for a fact that it represents a saint. And now you ask yourself, which saint? Well, that's the million-dollar question that will take us hours to explain, and we will probably not even reach a conclusion, because although it's arrived at the lab as Saint Joseph, that's not correct. And same goes for the place where the sculpture came from, because the quality of this piece does not match the tiny chapel where they claim to belong.
So, now, for the technological study. As you can see in the draft, this sculpture is formed by 3 blocks, the right hand, the head, and the main body. There's also a small hole in the base that we assume was made to help hold the sculpture while they were sculpting it. And, on the right, we can see some ornaments that aren't original to the sculpture. And, as the ornaments, the ropes also aren't originals, making them
overpaint.
When the sculpture arrived at our lab, she presented this thick, awfully applied layer of polychromy. However, after observing some lacuna, meaning the missing parts of the paint layer, we could see some gold leaf lurking underneath.
After seeing that, we were intrigued, of course, so we decided to make a stratigraphic study to understand why the gold leaf was there. Although we already had some ideas, when the results came in, all the suspicion we had was gone, because we knew that all those layers were certainly an estufado. We also learned the sculpture had 2 layers of overpainting, as you can see, justifying the rough appearance that it had.
So, we've been talking for a while, describing the sculpture and what so, but you're probably asking yourselves, what in the world is a estufado?
Indeed.
Well, estufado is a technique typical of Portugal and Spain in the Baroque period that intended to mimic the gorgeous lacing clothing of their era. An estufado, in its core, is a gilding with a beautiful twist. After all the layers are applied, just like in a gilding, it's applied a polychrome layer over the gold leaf, which doesn't seem to make much sense, but the possibilities of decoration motifs are almost endless. Some of the most common techniques are
the sgraffitado in Portuguese, or sgraffito in Italian, we think. After applying the polychrome layer, the paint is removed with a pointy object to reveal the gold leaf and create different lines and motifs, as you can see right here in the image. This is also the technique used in our sculpture.
Besides the sgraffitado or sgraffito, there's also other techniques like the one we can see here. In this case, instead of applying a solid color all over, a beautiful flower was painted with a small brush over the gold leaf.
But coming back to the sculpture, as you can probably tell, we decided to remove the overpaint. But why did we choose that path? Before we go over this point, it is important to mention that this intervention is in an academic context, and every decision was approved and consented by our professor, Ana Bidarra. So, moving on, we decided to remove the overpaint because we could see an estufado of great quality underneath all those thick layers, and it will make more sense to preserve the estufado in a good condition than a job poorly done.
And to do so, The overpaint was removed with a solvent form of acetone, benzoyl alcohol, carbopol, Ultra-S21, ethylene C25, and finally water, in a gel form, so that the solvent didn't affect the estofado, and we could still remove the 2 layers of overpainting. It was also used as scalpel when needed. Reaching our big discovery, after all that work, we finally found the estofado, in better condition than we thought. As you can see, the estofado can be seen in all the vestments of the sculpture, where it was identified 4 different patterns of decoration.
As you can see in this drawing, there's a general distribution of the patterns throughout the sculpture. The predominant pattern is the first one, which was used to cover all the exterior of the cassock, except for the hem and the collar. This pattern has some indiscriminate drawings that result from a mix of swirl and trefoil designs. As you can see in this image, the trefoil designs are filled with horizontal lines that resemble the lace. We also can see some geometric forms such as circles here or even here. The second pattern is, wait for the slide, okay. The second pattern is all over the hem and the collar, with some repetitive elements in a symmetric way. Elements like branch with a central stem from where swirls leaves with curves and counter curves are born. And for the last, no, this is the most simple pattern, which is some vermicular lines on a vertical sequence in which the concave side is thicker right here. Okay, and now
for the
last, we have the pattern that shows up less due to it only appearing on the inside of the cassock, like here or even here, with just some small circles arbitrarily arranged. And it's exactly because of all of this that we can truly understand the quality of the sculpture that we have in our hands.
So, in conclusion, we were very lucky to have the possibility to work on a magnificent piece full of history and technique. We close our presentation hoping that we gave you some intel on this unique and beautiful decoration typical of our country.
And thank you for listening. And if you have any question, feel free to ask us.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Vitória and Francisca, for such a vivid presentation and to introduce us this very interesting and challenging project that revealed many hidden secrets or many hidden patterns, at least. Last but not least, it's our pleasure to announce Irene Meneghetti from the University of Posta. And Irene will share her work about the study and reconstruction of an intriguing decorative surface technique focused on 2 tables attributed to Joseph Schneevogel. Irene, please.
Yes, exactly, Josef Schneevogel. Good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to present to you, and I'd like to thank you all at ConNext for the organization and the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. I'd like to begin my presentation with a quick precision regarding the title and the use of the term silography. I know this can lead to a bit of confusion because silography actually refers to woodblock printing. However, a lot of the literature that I consulted, German literature that I consulted as part of my research, also used the word silography to refer to transfer printing. So this is why I have it in the title as a kind of reference. But throughout my thesis and my presentation, I refer to the technique as transfer printing. So, to begin, the starting point of my work are 2 tables from the Stiftung Preußische Schlösser und Gärten Berlin-Brandenburg, which were made in the mid-19th century and bought by the Crown Prince and Princess for the furnishing of their summer residency, the then recently finished Schloss Charlottenhof in Potsdam. These 2 tables are part of several transfer printed objects in the castle. For example, here in this green bedroom, we see this sewing table, which is located here on the left of the picture. And the two tables that I'm talking about during my thesis were actually conserved as well as part of the thesis and exhibited now in Schloss Charlottenburg. The two tables from the Stiftung with the inventory numbers IV 1108 on the left here and IV 1011 on the right were to guide my research. There are two major points to my research. The first is more theoretical and focused on the history and development of the technique. My aim was really to kind of regroup and collate all of the existing history and information and to kind of make it a little bit more linear. I also looked at the important carpenters who carried out the technique. And the second part of my research was a practical part and was focused on the replication of the technique, specifically actually for printing in the right direction, so the original direction of the print. This reproduction seems to actually be the first reproduction of this kind. I also looked into the aging of objects with transfer printing with a focus on the two tables. The European transfer printing technique was developed in the mid-18th century for decorating ceramics, which is why I'm going to mention this very briefly before we get on to the development on wood. The oldest European object that we know with transfer printing is this teapot that we see here on the left. It was produced by the Doccia Manufacture in Italy in 1742 and is currently exhibited in the Victorian Albert Museum. For this first kind of process by the Doccia Manufacture, there was no patent accorded, and the first patent was awarded in 1756, a couple of years later, to John Sadler and Guy Green, who worked in the Battersea and Abel factory in England, and were actually the first to mass produce transfer printed wares at all. This is one of the just over 1,000 tiles that the two men produced for this patent, and it's exhibited in the Met in New York. The technique was used by many factories in England for decorating ceramics, and also in France, Sweden, and Germany in the mid-18th century. And Wedgwood, which is, yes, very well-known ceramics company, used it as the preferred decoration technique for fine, light-colored cream ceramics, which they called creamware, and became very popular. The Nymphenburg Porzellan Manufacture in Bavaria also often uses the technique today. The technique on wood served a similar purpose as for ceramics. It was supposed to replace hand painting and marquetry and inlay, and thus embellish objects more quickly and make them more accessible and cheaper. The technique is one of several imitation techniques that was developed in the 18th century, such as decoupage, which we see here on the left, on this paravent from the Fraueninsel. Then we also have other techniques such as plaster modeling or papier-mâché, and these were all techniques that aimed to also kind of diversify wares and make them more accessible to a wide audience. The technique was then quickly transferred from ceramic to other hard materials. So not only wood, but also metal and stone were carriers for transfer printing. And the oldest object mentioned on wood is a tea caddy from 1790 by Geoffrey Beard in England. The technique seems to kind of have fizzled off in the mid-1800s, and this butterfly cabinet from Anton Hilde from the V&A seems to be one of the last known objects. However, objects were made in Scotland with Mauchline ware, in England, Austria, Italy, and also, of course, Germany. And many patents were also issued for these different techniques. However, we have very, very few examples of objects in public collections. Germany seems to be the only country in which there was a mass production of transfer printed furniture specifically. Johann Georg Hilde was publicly presenting printed furniture from 1818 onwards, which he made with his son Anton Hilde, and they sold as well as gifted to the Bavarian royal family. This table that we see above is a typical example of one of their wares, which they decorated with a so-called quodlibet, which is this kind of superposition of many different images and quite a busy aesthetic. He and his son were commissioned in 1821 to make the furniture for the royal wedding happening between the Princess Elizabeth of Bavaria and the Crown Prince of Prussia in 1823. This furniture that they produced was exhibited in Munich before being transported to Berlin as part of the princess's dowry. On the other hand, Josef Schneevogel, so the other person who was associated with this technique, was working in Berlin since at least 1825, the time when he applied for Prussian citizenship to become a master carpenter. He presented his masterpiece in 1828, which was a mechanical secretary, which we see here in the lower image, with a masterfully executed transfer print of Schloss Tegernsee, which is what we can see directly in this detail. And the secretary is exhibited in Schloss Charlottenburg, which is the place that it was actually bought for. As an apprentice to the well-known cabinet maker Christian Sievenig, who frequently received commissions from the royal family in Prussia, Schneevogel presumably saw transfer printed furniture while he was working in the different castles of the royal family, and probably just decided to kind of try out this technique as well. We know from a report by Heinrich Spieker from the year 1833 that he made maplewood furniture with transfer printing, and an article from the Polytechnic Society of Berlin in 1846 also mentions him as actually being an expert for the technique in Berlin. The tables, I'll just describe them briefly. They have a rectangular tabletop, which we can see here. They have beveled edges. In the center of the tabletop is the image. Either it's kind of framed with these black lines, or here we have a more kind of abstract form where the print is rounded and doesn't have a particular frame, except on the outline of the table here. The tabletops are veneered with maple. They're standing then on this column with turned column with 3 legs that end in volutes, and the leg and the column are solid maple wood. The dark and light contrast between the wood and the decoration is typical of the Biedermeier period in which the tables were made. So to come to the method for transferring onto porcelain is different from the method for transferring onto wood. The method for porcelain uses what's called a glue bat, so a sheet of paper, a sheet of glue or very thin paper, and this uses very little pressure, so just rubbing or very little pressure to transfer a fresh engraving onto the porcelain or the ceramic. The method for wood, however, uses thick paper, hard pressing or clamps, so a lot of pressure, and you can transfer a fresh or actually also an older engraving onto a wooden surface. Most literature refers to copper engravings, but they could also use lithographic prints, and we know that Johann Georg Hilte and Josef Schneevogel actually had prints specifically made, lithographic prints, sorry, made for their works. The methods that I found in the literature, I compared all of the methods that I could find in historical literature in many different languages, and most of them are actually incredibly similar. They mostly just differ in one detail: if the print is going to be transferred as a reverse image, or if it's going to be transferred in the correct direction. So the first method, where it's transferred reversed, is that the print is directly just placed on top of the wood, and then we have a reversed image. The second method, which allows it to be transferred in the right direction, is kind of like a temporary tattoo, where you have to transfer the print firstly onto another piece of paper, so it's called transfer paper, and then from this transfer paper you transfer it onto the wooden surface, and then we have the picture in the right direction. This allows, for example, text to be transferred legibly, and also maps or recognizable images to be transferred. The reproduction carried out in my work to transfer in the correct and original direction seems to be, like I said in the introduction, the first contemporary reproduction. I followed the method from G.A. Siddons in the German translation of his book, Der Englische Ratgeber, which was published in 1842. I followed this method because it was published, probably around the same time that the tables were made. The varnish that I use is based on tree resin, and the recipe was published in the Polytechnic Society of Berlin in 1846. And this could actually be the same varnish that was used by Schneeberger. I used historical engravings for my tests, one of which you can see here. And yeah, sorry, the tree resin varnish is made up of mastic, sandarac, Venetian turpentine, and turpentine oil. So to come to the method that I followed, I prepared the panels. They were sanded, watered or moistened. I applied several layers of glue solvent and then several layers of varnish. The transfer paper, so I used thick cardboard to transfer the print onto first. It was moistened, glue solvent was applied, and then varnish was also applied. The print was then prepared, so I trimmed off all excess paper so that really only the print was left. I laid it in lukewarm water for 30 minutes so that it could absorb enough water. And then I transferred the print onto the transfer paper. So I transferred it in that I coated the transfer paper with varnish. I then laid the print on top, which had been very briefly laid in blotting paper to absorb the excess water. Then I placed 2 layers of drawing paper, which we can see here on top, and then finally a heated wooden pad, and then I clamped it overnight. Once it was dry the next day, I had to remove the historical paper from the back of the print. So I did this by moistening it with a sponge and water. I just used tap water, and you rub the paper very, very carefully with the fingers until a very thin layer remains. I then had to transfer the print onto the wood, so I did this by moistening the transfer paper from the back. I then applied a layer of varnish onto the wood, and I placed the print down onto the wood and clamped it as I did in the previous step 4. I rubbed off the paper, the transfer paper from the print as in step 5, and then finally I could varnish and finish the print. So since this was the first reconstruction that that happened pretty much, there were actually previous reproductions of the easier method, but none of the previous reproductions actually dealt with the issues that they encountered, or the issues that I encountered in any case. And I mostly had to base myself on the historical methods, which, as most of us know, following historical methods from the 19th century and 18th century can be a little bit challenging sometimes. So the main issues that I encountered was firstly the water absorption of the paper. To be able to actually separate the print, the ink from the paper, the ink had to become attached to the varnish, but the paper had to stay water soluble. So the way that I had to do this is actually letting the paper soak up enough water. The problem that we see in this test is that I didn't let the paper soak up enough water, and it soaked up then all of the varnish, and the print was unable to be transferred. I'll cite text, so one of the methods that I consulted from W. Badley, dating from the year 1832, so I'm citing now. The paper being saturated with moisture does not unite with the transfer varnish, but the ink being of a greasy texture is impervious to the water and is therefore taken hold of by the varnish and securely fastened to the wood. The paper not being held so is washed away with comparative ease, leaving the ink imprinted upon the wood. So yeah, the kind of key step to this is to really keep the paper water soluble, and the ink has to glue essentially into the varnish. The next issue that I encountered was the rubbing off of the paper. So the paper has to be rubbed off to leave just a very, very thin layer on the print. This actually was incredibly challenging, specifically when there were gray areas or lighter areas in general, and then specifically also text, because the substance of the ink is less thick. So unfortunately, I did actually lose a lot of kind of more delicate areas, such as here we see I lost the text, unfortunately, and here the bits in the sky were also missing. The methods also say that the last layer of paper should become transparent after applying varnish, but that unfortunately wasn't the case with my tests. And the last issue that I had was the varnish. So the varnish was incredibly thick. I tried to dilute it with turpentine oil, but sorry, it's the Venetian turpentine, but this was unfortunately unsuccessful, and it still dried very, very streaky and took a very, very long time to dry as well. After leaving it for about 3 weeks to dry, it still wasn't possible to sand it and polish it, so I actually had to unfortunately take off most of the varnish and replace it with a shellac varnish to be able to do a French polish on it. So to come to the aging, the signs of aging on the two tables from the Stiftung are typical of objects with tree resin varnishes. The varnish is yellowed, it's cracked, and shows a loss of transparency due to the effect of light and oxygen, which interact chemically and physically with the organic materials present in the varnish. This causes oxidation, which changes the molecular structure of the resin. Table IV 1108, which we see here on the left, presents a very different image, for example, from the other table 1111. We see here both of them present yellowing. Here we have a very clear loss of transparency over the print. It appears cloudy, and you can't really see exactly what's pictured. We see here a very reflective surface on the surface of the print, however, of the whole tabletop, but there is actually a craquelure that goes over the entire surface of the tabletop, and this is actually found underneath this last layer of varnish, so it's presumed that this was actually then re-varnished at some point in time. On the other hand, here, this table on the right, we see no loss of transparency. The print is very, very legible. Mostly we have a very, very deep craquelure and, of course, the yellowing. Here we see that the tabletop appears dried out and dull and matte, and the table appears to then obviously not have been varnished over, as is the case with the other table. A further analysis of the aging could potentially allow for more precise attribution of the works and also a better understanding of the method used, which unfortunately wasn't possible due to time limitations. So in conclusion, despite the difficulties posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, which happened during my bachelor thesis, I did actually manage to collate the existing information available for me. However, several points remain unclear because of this, especially when looking at the first wooden objects in Germany and other countries. The reproduction was a central part of this project, and the method of transferring the motif in the right direction has not been documented in any contemporary works that I know of, and is therefore a challenge I was able to successfully overcome. Thank you so much for your attention, and I really look forward to your questions.
So thank you, Irene, for introducing us to this fascinating technique. And now we arrived at our second Q&A. So let's start with some questions for Javier. I have actually one question, and the question is, what did you use as an emulsifier?
Yeah, we used Tween as a tensioactive and also as the emulsifier.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
Mute my microphone. And now for Victoria and Francisca, we have some questions for you from Andreas.
Yeah.
Okay. How could you be sure that the revealed estofado layer was complete enough before removing the overpaint?
Well, because we had enough lacunas over the vestments that confirmed the presence of the estofado, and the areas that we not had that confirmation, we made some tests to be sure.
Thank you very much. I think it was answered. And also from Mafalda, why do you think the head of the sculpture was carved separately?
So basically, in the pictures we could not see it, Where in person, in the area of the neck and the color of the vestments, we could see the joint of the head, even though we had many layers of polychromy. And in that time of period when the sculpture allegedly was made, it was not that uncommon to have the head made separately because it was a smaller piece. So it was easier to carve it separately than with the sculpture, then made the sculpture in one.
Especially in a wood sculpture.
Thank you very much, Francisca and Victoria. Vincent?
Yes, so Irene, we have some questions for you as well. The first one comes from Henning Schulze. Prints on the tabletops shown at the beginning appear to have a more yellow background, while the border outside of the frame was lighter. Is this a result of the printing process or due to different applications of varnish?
That's actually a really interesting question that I also asked myself, and I was unable to come to the conclusion. What we ideally would have wanted to do as well, I ideally wanted to do, is take a sample and be able to do a microanalysis to see if there was a difference in the components. Specifically the print on the table IV 108, the one with the dog on it, it's actually thicker as well over the print, and the outside of the table seems to be thinner. So it could be that the varnish was maybe removed on the outside, on the edge, or that it was more built up over the print is another alternative. It seems unlikely that there's paper underneath it or something like this, because there's no visible kind of marks of paper, and this wasn't it wasn't visible under a microscope either, so this seems to be just a difference in the varnish. But yeah, a further analysis would have been fascinating.
Okay, thank you. So a next question, it's an empirical process step to know how much time the prints have to stay in the water. Anything in the literature about this types of paper? Is it also necessary to take the type of ink in consideration?
I didn't really hear the end of that. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, sorry. Also shouldn't you take in consideration the types of paper and the type of ink?
So the type of paper and type of ink don't seem to really be relevant. There were, so I did a lot of preliminary tests as well, and I used just prints that were printed from a normal printer. And this worked perfectly well once I managed to figure out that I had to soak the prints in a lot of water to allow the paper to absorb enough water. The only ones that didn't really work were actually newspaper images. So if the paper is particularly thin, it's much more difficult because it absorbs a lot of varnish. But other than that, if it's thicker paper, then it's usually, and printing paper, modern paper is also possible. And the ink just has to not be water soluble.
Mm-hmm. But there isn't any information in the historical literature on that.
Sorry, in the historical literature, there was no mention of this. Most of the methods were quite simply described, and they talked a lot about the kind of wood support that you can use for the technique, but the different kinds of paper or the ink was not mentioned really at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so next question comes from Shane Rivers, and she says you refer to glue solvent. She questions what that is.
I think this is probably a bad translation on my behalf from a German word, Leimlöscher, which is a very thinned out high bone glue solution. So yeah, very watered. So it's very low percentage hide glue, bone glue, sorry, in water that's then applied onto the wood before the varnish comes on.
Okay, that's clear. Another question comes from Andreas Krupa. Many pieces of furniture are missing a primary coating because they have been considered to be damaged. Into furniture with prints and secondary varnishes. And how stable is the transfer print on the wooden surface?
There are, yes, like I showed in the pictures, so there are cases of pieces of furniture being varnished over, and I think that he mentioned that I already answered that question. But I actually would have also liked to compare other objects from the collection in Schloss Charlottenhof, where there are more other objects, in order to see if this kind of, yeah, the secondary varnishes or whatever would kind of give any indication about maybe dating or different methods or something like this, or different aging as well. But this was unfortunately not possible. However, I do presume that this probably is the case quite often. And the prints seem to be quite stable on the furniture. I didn't see that many examples of that much damage. Mostly it has to be mechanical damage that's happened to be able to remove it, but otherwise it seems to be quite fixed and stable in the varnish itself.
Okay, up to the next question. One from the audience, from Jess. Which other varnishes could be used on such objects? Was there a mention of other varnishes in the literature?
Yes, the literature mentions all kind of resin varnishes. So you can use tree resin varnishes, but also shellac, and they kind of vary. Most of them have sandarak in them. Sandarak being a resin that offers a very clear surface, and actually that was kind of the aim, that the varnish would stay as clear as possible so as not to change the light and dark contrast of the print on the wood. It was often mentioned that you should use a lightly colored wood to kind of enhance this contrast, and therefore, yeah, the varnish should be as clear as possible.
Okay, and then the final question from Shane. Did you try any methods to reduce the loss of saturation on the transfer print?
Sorry, could you? Oh, yes. Okay, I see it in the chat. So when the print was then moistened, when the table was moistened, as I was cleaning it, I cleaned it with surfactant in water. It did actually become legible again. So it would have been. Oh, you mean? Sorry, do you mean the loss of transparency or the loss of the varnish, the craquelure?
I don't know, Shane. You can take the word if you want to.
It was that whitish bloom that I was thinking about, and just wondering if you'd managed to reduce that.
The whitish.
Yes, there we go.
On the outside, on the.
Yes, yes.
No, the actual treatment that I carried out was really minimal. It was really just based on cleaning and very light retouching. I would have also suggested trying to kind of look at reducing loss of transparency, for example, but there wasn't really the time for that, unfortunately. But it would have been interesting to kind of look more at or different kind of treatment opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, I lost again my graph. Sorry about this. So thank you again, Xavier, Victoria, Francisca, and Irene, for such wonderful presentations, and thank you for the questions from our audience. Before we start with the closing remarks, I would like just to say a few words about ConNext and how I got here. So we and the Tomar Polytechnic Institute, where I teach sculpture conservation, are new members of this group, and it has been a wonderful experience, and I really feel privileged to be part of this conference and to be part of this initiative. And when I first saw the call for new partners and saw the ideas and the ideal behind the conference, I really thought it was a great concept. So some of the students that are here today know me. and know that I just keep pushing them to present their works, to share ideas, because sharing is the best way to learn and to keep learning. I would also like to thank my colleague, Fernando Antunes, for helping me to convince the students to present their works. So their work. So thank you all for letting us join you, and it has been a real privilege. Thank you very much. So Vincent will now say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna, for the kind words. And talking about privilege, it's already the second year in a row that we as organizers and the audience have been privileged to see, learn, and enjoy from all our presenters' work. So big thank you to all the presenters of this ConNext conference. Additionally, I must say that we are lucky to be part of a team of 8 partners organizing the ConNext Student Conference. And once again, the whole organization of this conference went as smoothly as possible. And it's due to this exceptional collaboration, which is a result of our similarities as educational and research institutes. And it clearly shows that language and borders are a non-issue today. Just as Lucretia Kargère mentioned in her keynote when talking about the 11th and 12th century trade, the genesis and the factual event of ConNext is an example of how interconnected the world is and how we all share common ground when it comes to sharing our passion and enthusiasm. Yet, paradoxically, our differences are our strength as well. As we've seen during this year's and also last year's session, the sheer diversity and different approaches for the conservation and restoration treatments, the large variety of objects and research topics, has shown what a staggering amount of information and progress in the field we are able to generate and share with each other each year. So, this is one of the reasons that ConNext came to be, to communicate your hard work, which otherwise would remain largely unnoticed beyond our institutes. So yes, we are proud of ConNext, that it does what it does, that it does what it's aimed to do. But once again, this would never have been possible without the hard work of my partner in crime, Sophie Vleru, from the University of Amsterdam, and all my international colleagues, and please bear with me because this is a long list, from the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences, Friederike Panzig and Andreas Gruber, Julia Schultz from the University of Applied Sciences and Art, Hildesheim, Angelika Rauch from the University of Applied Sciences, Potsdam, Henning Schulze from the University of Lincoln, Shane Rivers from Wesleyan College, and last but not least, Anna Bidara from the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we would also like to thank all our keynote speakers, Paul van Duin and Arlen Hagenbottom, sorry for pronunciation, Roger Griffith, Irma Ermans, Stephanie Offray, and of course Lucretia Kargère. So
hopefully we'll see each other next year. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.